The true character of a society is revealed in how it treats its children. Nelson Mandela said that in 1997. And yet, around the world, as we've heard over and over again, too many children grow up without dignity, without respect, without protection, and perhaps worst of all, without love. In distant, cold institutions where we know that they're far less likely to succeed and far more likely to suffer than children raised in families and communities. This is true in all countries, it's true in all demographics. The research is there, the evidence is clear. Now, thanks to persistent advocacy by organizations like Lumos and the leadership of the European Commission, there's a growing momentum to end institutionalization worldwide. But we still have a long way to go. The mission of the UN Human Rights Office is to protect and promote the human rights of all people everywhere. And that includes the rights of children, enshrined as they are in the Convention on the Rights of the Child. A key part of our work in this, both in Europe and beyond, is about ending institutional care, advocating for family-focused and community-based solutions, and building capacity to implement those solutions. We base our work on the recommendations made by the UN human rights mechanisms, but also by the Sustainable Development Agenda, through which we have all committed to attain inclusive societies by 2030. The EU is a union of values, values that are aligned with universal human rights. As such, human rights should be at the core of all EU programs. The protection of children is an area where the EU should continue to lead and to add value. To do so, it must exercise due diligence to make sure that it doesn't knowingly or unwittingly fund activities that could result in or perpetuate the segregation or exclusion of children. And we've seen that when EU funds are spent in line with human rights values, they can do immense good. They can strengthen families and communities and stimulate social inclusion. In this light, the next multi-annual financial framework, the MFF, can be a tremendous force for positive change. Now, to ensure that the ongoing shift towards deinstitutionalization is firmly anchored in the MFF, we would call for this document to explicitly recognize and promote the right to independent living and community inclusion for all. Migration plays an increasingly prominent role on the EU agenda, and here we believe that no effort should be spared to ensure that the children's best interests come first. Migrant children should not be placed in or returned to institutions. In concrete terms, this means that EU funding should not be spent on such institutions, but rather on supporting the development of alternatives. The MFF should also include a focus on the collection of disaggregated data. This may not sound terribly exciting, I know, but we need statistics to know how to best design solutions that work for kids. Without those figures, concrete action becomes more complicated and far less likely. Intense negotiations on the MFF are about to kick off. The Commission is proposing to include very strong language that would allow the EU to forge ahead with many of the things we've talked about today. This is welcome, and we call on EU member states to support these proposals. But member states must also lead by example by aiming for equally robust action within the Union. And recently, the appalling conditions in one member state institution caused an outcry. Given the Commission's growing leadership on DI, it's inexcusable that institutions where children suffer from unspeakable treatment remain open in some member states. Institutions where, as Martina put it this morning, souls are being scarred. As long as this is the case, the EU won't be able to fully shoulder its deserved role as a global leader on this issue, and that's a role that we want and need it to continue playing. It's been so very encouraging to hear about the work that you're all doing to ensure that no child is left behind. In its preamble, the CRC, the most widely ratified human rights treaty in history, says that to fully and harmoniously develop their personalities, children should grow up in a family environment, in an atmosphere of happiness, love, and understanding. That's a pretty strong and flawless vision. It's so ambiguous and unambiguous and positive, in fact, that it could have been articulated by a child. We have a responsibility to make it a reality on the ground in Nepal and Kazakhstan, Colombia and Kenya, but also Hungary and Belgium, everywhere else too. It's not a naive vision. With political resolve, clever use of funding, and sound policies like the ones we've talked about here today, we can get there.